No money for fancy inserts? Me neither, but I've got you covered. What's up, gang? Welcome to Room and Board. My name is Chris George, and today we are going to talk about how to build the perfect board game insert on a budget. A good board game insert can go a long way, not just in terms of organization, but in terms of maximizing and optimizing setup and teardown time. I guess I should say minimizing. The fact is that some games are just really annoying to get out to the table. I recently got Anachrony secondhand. You can see the size of this box. Oh, this is not a good idea. And this entire box was filled with just little baggies, and so much so that I opened it, looked at it, and immediately put it away and never read the rule book because it was too overwhelming to even think about setting up and figuring out how to play. Rising Sun is one of my favorite games of all time, but when you have 2, 3, 4, 5 boxes in a game, even if you love that game, sometimes getting to the table can be a chore. And with the ever-growing trend of Kickstarters and stretch goals upon stretch goals, creative storage solutions are at an all-time premium. So, what I'm going to do with this video is first break down the types of options that are available if you're interested in purchasing a board game insert, because there are quite a few, and if you have disposable income, these are neat ways to treat yourself for games that you play a lot. And I think it's worthwhile to cover these sorts of options before I go on to tell you how they're all garbage. And you can easily make something just as good, if not better, with stuff you can find at the dollar store, like a glue gun, some foam core, and an X-Acto knife. That's it. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I want to talk about building your own insert rather than purchasing one, but I want to just scroll through the options available so you can get a sense of how much they cost. I'm going to use Rising Sun as an example because there was a time where I would search the internet every day just to stare at these inserts and drool and picture having them. That was until I realized it's not that hard to create your own, and I'm actually super happy with my own storage solution because I've managed to cut down these 5 boxes into basically the core box. And I think it's better in a lot of ways, even though some of these are really beautiful. And these are also great resources to look at when designing your own insert because they've done most of the design work for you. And since there are so many options of insert companies now, you'll be able to look at most of them and see what sort of system might work for you and what sort of system you want to try to implement into your own storage solution. Obviously, most of these are wood and you'll be working with this sort of foam core, but they're good to use just as a baseline. So first off, we have the Broken Token. If you have heard of board game inserts, you've probably heard of the Broken Token. They were founded in 2013. They ship out of Vista, California, so if you're close to there, maybe shipping is reduced. I'm not sure. Being in Canada and having never really ordered these inserts, I'm not sure what shipping is like. But they have incredibly solid designs, at least for the Rising Sun. As you can see, it is $131 US, so that works out to be $160 Canadian. So you're basically doubling the cost of the game if you want this fancy organizer. What I like about this insert, and what I'll talk about a little bit later, is that each clan has its own removable section. So you don't have to remove everything. I think that's really valuable, and honestly, out of most of them, this is one of my favorite designs. So that's the Broken Token. Then we have Folded Space. Now, Folded Space is the only one on this list that doesn't use wood. They actually use something called Evacore, which to me seems pretty similar to the foam core that you can get at the dollar store for $1.25 a sheet. They say this is memory foam in which quality printed card is laminated to add rigidity. This will obviously be your cheapest option if you are going to buy. And you can see here we have the Rising Sun, 27 euros. This is for the Daimyo box, which covers the expansions. If you have the base game, you're also looking at another 33 euros. Which, when added together and translated, that's about $90 Canadian. It's still incredibly expensive for just some memory foam. Folded Space also ships out of Bulgaria. Next, moving along, Go7 Gaming is another one that you can check out. I know they often supply Board Game Bliss, which is a company in Toronto, with their gaming inserts, so it's possible you can pick up some of these from your local gaming store. As you see, that's about $100 US. 120, 130 Canadian for the Rising Sun bundle. We also have Tower Rex, which operates out of Ukraine. They are on Etsy. They've got a bunch of different organizers. Really nice stuff. Canadian 115, so we're getting cheaper and cheaper as we go along. Then if you are in Canada, this is the only Canadian company that I currently know of. It's called Gaming Trunk. They used to operate out of Winnipeg, and now they operate out of Ottawa. And here you can get a Rising Sun insert for $103. And then we have Meeple Realty, which I hadn't heard about until I started researching these sort of options for this video. Their Rising Sun one will cost you like $110. Finally, we have Basically Wooden, which I know operates out of the UK. They have my least favorite design for Rising Sun in particular. And I'm using Rising Sun as a baseline because I've thought a lot about optimizing setup and teardown time. It's a game I get out a lot, and I want to be able to play it a lot and share it with a lot of people. And if I have to spend a half an hour setting up the game, that's not conducive to bringing it out all the time. However, this video is not where to buy an insert, it's how to make your own. So let's talk about that. Now, all of those are really gorgeous, sure, but they are all so expensive. For the Broken Token Rising Sun insert, I could get 3 great games. It seems ridiculous to me, especially for people like me who don't have a lot of money and who are kind of on a budget, because everything you saw, even though it's wood, can be made with this and a glue gun. And let me tell you, I am horrible at crafts, and I've managed to do some things that I am incredibly proud of, and that make setup and teardown an efficient breeze. See, for me, the goal of an insert is not to look beautiful. Mine don't. They're white foam core, that's it. But the goal of a great insert, for me, is to optimize setup and teardown time. That is the #1 priority because I am interested in getting the games to the table and playing them, and not spending time taking things in and out of boxes. So with that criteria in mind, some games have perfectly great inserts and never need to be touched. I'm thinking of Wingspan, for example. It doesn't necessarily have an insert per se, but the box and the components have been designed so that everything fits back nicely. They have a little legend on the side of the box, and everything has its own place. Things don't move around, and setting it up and putting it back in the box is incredibly easy. And something like Lords of Waterdeep, I think, has a great insert. A bad box, but a really nice insert because every piece has its place. There are also some games that have half of a great insert. And then there are the games where they just throw everything into the box and they say, deal with it. But for those that have half of something useful, there is no reason why you can't keep that useful bit and supplement other parts with something more effective. You'll see this with my Rising Sun solution later on, and with what I want to do with Spirit Island. I guess that's tip #1 of building the perfect insert on a budget, is identify which parts of the insert are great and use those things. And by finding out which parts are great, that will identify what you need to create for yourself. Tip #2 is that bags and bins are used for different things. Now, when I first got into the hobby, I thought to myself, oh yeah, I'm gonna bag everything. There's not gonna be a component left in this town that ain't got a bag. And I went out and I bought 1,000,000 bags of all different sizes, and I packaged everything in, which was a great thought, but I have since realized it's not that effective. Just having 1,000,000 bags in a box doesn't necessarily mean that things are organized in an optimal way. So I came up with this rule. If all of the components are going to be used in the game, such as all of your roads and cities for Catan, yeah, those go into a bag because they're player pieces, you can hand them out, they're all going to be dumped out, perfect. However, if they won't all be used, such as common resource pools, then they go in a little bin, because you'll only be taking as much as needed, and then when the time comes for the game to be packed up, boom, you return your resources, it's already done and ready to go. Set up, tear down. Now bins, these little bins that I'm showing you on the screen right now, these can be bought in packages of 10 from the Dollar Tree for $1. There are no other bins that you need to find other than these. They're a great size for components. They fit into most boxes. They are an integral part of creating a great storage solution, because you could spend the time and create a little box out of foam core and make something with a lid that you can take off. But why would you when you can get one of these for 10 cents? It's a no-brainer. These are the best things that I have found, and they are so cheap. So find a Dollar Tree. Don't order these from Amazon. I looked on Amazon before this video and somebody was trying to sell one package of them for $10. God, it makes me mad. Go to the Dollar Tree, they are incredible. That kind of leads me to tip number 3, is always be on the lookout for great component bins. Every time I'm in a dollar store or a craft store or a Walmart or Value Village, I'm always kind of checking to see if there are little boxes. Dollar store are great. Michael's, if you have that in your city, they're also pretty good. Their bins are a little bit more expensive, but you can get some nice sizes and some nice dividers. But the dollar store is really where you want to be looking. Target and Walmart, I haven't found that great value, but I've managed to find some really interesting containers at Value Village. And what's more, when you start being on the lookout for these things while you're out, you'll suddenly realize that lots of weird things come in really great packages. I've bought earplugs that have come in an awesome, perfectly sized container. In Istanbul, I converted a Ferrero Roche Christmas box that my parents had into an insert that holds everything that I need. So always be on the lookout for these types of boxes and just start storing them up, because as your game collection grows, you'll find uses for them. Tip number 4 when starting to build a great insert is make sure you play the game first. Before you follow some plan that you found on the internet, before you even really sort the components in a major way, try to play the game first. I've thought I was sorting something effectively, and then I finally played the game and I realized, oh, this doesn't suit the flow of play. So make sure you kind of have a sense of what the flow of play will be, and then you'll realize if you need a solution or not. The same thing along that line is kind of tip number 5, is think about what will be returned to the box. I'll turn to Rising Sun again for example of this, but in Rising Sun, everyone has their own clan, and there will be clans that people do not pick, which won't be used for that game. This is why basically wooden was my least favorite design of an insert, because they have you pulling out 2 clans at the same time without realizing that only one of those clans might be used in the game. It's the little things like that that make the setup and teardown more exhaustive than they need to be. And if you can streamline and optimize in that way, you'll be getting it to the table quicker, and that's a great thing. This can also work for different player counts, thinking about what's going to stay in the box. I'm thinking of Orléans, for example. You have a different number of pieces added to the setup based upon the number of players. So I have a lot of my games optimized for the number of players that I generally play that game with. And then I have little additional sections with labels on them that say, for 3 players, add X amount of pieces. For 4 players, add X amount of pieces. And having those sorts of little bits of information on the box themselves saves you from having to search the rulebook every time you pull the game out, because it's right there. You don't have to say, oh, how many do we add for 4 people? You look, and there's the tin that you add for 4 people. Done. So having things set out already in the box this way can help you enormously. And finally, tip number 6, before we get into these sorts of inserts, is that BoardGameGeek.com is your best friend. The great thing about our community is that we are excited to share. Chances are someone or multiple people have designed the exact insert that you're looking for, and you can just copy their plan, steal their concept. They're putting it up there for you to use, and use it either as a jumping off point or replicate it exactly. The insert that I'm going to show you that I built for Catacombs, I found on BoardGameGeek, and it is incredible, and I would never have been able to visualize that myself, especially since Catacombs was one of the first inserts that I really tried my hand at building. So use BoardGameGeek. Literally Google BoardGameGeek, name of game, insert, and you'll find some great things. All right, so you finally identified the parts that you can't supplement with cheap dollar store bins, and now it's time to talk about how to use Foamcore. You just use this, and you use this, and a pencil, and a ruler. For someone who isn't crafty, like me, this seems overwhelming, but stick around and I'll walk you through all the different inserts that I've made and kind of talk about how I've made each and every one of them. And then I'll do a recap at the end on things to remember when working with Foamcore. But this is super easy to work with. You measure the box, you measure the spaces that you need in the box, you do the same measurements on this Foamcore, and you cut it out with this X-Acto knife and glue it together with a glue gun. You're basically going to be making boxes without heads on them. Without heads, without lids. And if you'd prefer, you don't have to use the little bins or dollar store organizers. It's just, why wouldn't you if you have one that fits? Because generally they're $1 to $2 and it saves you the time from building them. And they're not $160. So now I'm going to switch the camera angle and I'll take you through all the different inserts that I've made. Every component has its own space made out of something from Foamcore. Some, you just need a little added mwah to make it work. It's really not that hard. And after you've made your first one, you'll start feeling confident enough to get creative, more creative than just making boxes. And stick around to the end because I'll do a recap of the main things to remember when working with Foamcore. Let's switch it up. So first, let's take a look at Catacombs. Now, Catacombs is a dexterity game where you flick monsters at other monsters. One person plays the dungeon master, the other players play the monsters. That's not true. The other players play the heroes. Anyway, it's really annoying because you have all these different sorts of stuff now, and you have no insert. So I am particularly proud of this one, but when you break it down, really it's just rectangles. Now this is the first insert I made, and the reason I wanted to make something is because you can see there's all these different monsters that are all different sizes and have different stickers on them. And I was finding it really hard to get to the table because it was so annoying taking everything out of the box. You're constantly grabbing and getting different things in between rounds. So I found this design just on BoardGameGeek. That's it. And it works pretty well. It's a tough box to make an insert for because it is really long and it's really thin. So the cards themselves are a little hard to organize, but I have them organized in heroes and bosses, setup, items, special cards, and monsters. What I found really exciting about this design is that it is divided into these movable chunks. And this really helps when you have like a wide board and you don't have that much table space. These can just be placed wherever you need them rather than chunks on a table. And then here, these are divided into monster tiers. So there's 4 monster tiers and I just divide them like that. What I really, really love about this design, which I thought was really slick and inspired me and helped me learn for future, is that right here, you can probably see there's an indentation. So in order for these player boards to fit into the box, there's a slight indentation where they can rest so that these player boards and this thing are completely flush. And keeping everything flush when you're creating an insert is incredibly important because then they don't shift around as much. You don't open the box to find your boards kind of strewn all over the place, but everything has its own spot and that helps keep everything in place, especially in something which has a lot of these little discs and pieces that could go everywhere if it wasn't flush with the top. Now, the thing that I screwed up about this is there are these little boards that go around the edge of your map. Basically, because you're flicking things, this makes sure none of the flicky things go on the floor. So I actually didn't account for this extra space, and I kind of had to shave off stuff to cram them in at the end. And by putting them kind of both on the sides, you lose a little bit of real estate here. You'll see when I put everything back together, you'll lose a little bit of real estate here where you could be using that to extend certain elements. It's not the end of the world, but you can see that it doesn't necessarily fit perfectly because I just forgot that I needed to save some space, which is going to happen. And this is how you learn these sorts of things. So what I did to create this is that I started out with a big flat piece of foam core on the bottom, which I knew was going to be my base for everything. And yeah, you see it's tough. It's a tough fit to get in because I didn't account for this stuff when I was measuring it out. So I took a big piece of foam core on the bottom, and then I kind of drew the lines where I knew I wanted to cut it and where I knew I wanted the walls to go. Anytime you're making card holders like this too, it's super easy. Here, I'll just pull this out. It's super easy to just take your X-Acto knife and cut a little space out of your wall, and that way you can grab the cards easily. I wouldn't create all these little individual pieces. What you do is you just create one long strip, and then when it's empty, you just take your X-Acto knife and just cut yourself a little finger hole. Anyway, that's Catacombs. Make sure you measure the base with existing things. It's easy to get excited that you're creating this neat thing and forget that there are other pieces that aren't going to fit into this part. But for the most part, I'm really happy with it. It sits pretty much completely flush. There's a tiny bit of lip. If I had remembered to include the rule book in my measurement calculations, I wouldn't have to worry about it, but the rule books are so small anyway that those sorts of things don't really matter, and you get still a closed box. And even if I take it on its end and shake it up and shake it around, because everything is flush with the box lid, I should be able to open it and nothing's really shifted. These things have moved around in their own area, and if you really wanted to get more specific, you could create individual dividers for specific like classes and whatever. I don't think you really need to from a play perspective, but you can see that nothing fell over because everything is tightly to the lid. Next up, we have Spirit Island. Now, Spirit Island I actually haven't made an insert for. I just want to open it and show you quickly what I want to do. Here are the map tiles, which can only be placed in a very specific orientation. I'm going to try to add a card divider like you're going to see in Dead of Winter, but I know I only have a specific amount of real estate to work with based upon the depth of the box and the shape of these weird pieces. For Spirit Island, I was able to find this at the dollar store. It's great. It carries everything. It's so much better than bags. And when you have something like this that you can just set on the table, you don't have to make those sorts of things yourself. It would be easy to make a little box that had all these sorts of dividers. But if you can find them at the dollar store, and I did find this at the dollar store, it was $1.25, and they're so perfect. So always be on the lookout for things like these, which can make organizing your components a lot easier. In this instance, you wouldn't want a box for each individual component. You could, but having something like this that you can just set out is a lifesaver. Now here you'll see that I still have all the player pieces in bags because there's no need to put those in a bin. You're gonna pass these out to random players and boom. And then here is the reason why I want to create a little bit of a card divider, because I find that things sort of do shift around. And there are enough categories of cards that for me, it makes sense to just take some time and create a card divider. Now you'll see there isn't much space vertically. There isn't much vertical space left in this insert. So what I'm gonna probably do is I'm gonna take an X-Acto knife and I'm just gonna cut all along here because I'd like to keep this to hold these things in place, because there's another little section underneath that holds the board and holds a few more things under that. And so I think that's a really effective part of this insert that I want to keep, but there's no problem in just taking an X-Acto knife, cutting out the part that I don't want, and then organizing these cards in a way, once that's out, I'll have the clearance to organize them kind of standing up. So whatever I need to grab, I can just grab that section rather than having to take out the whole pile of cards and grab the section that I want. This also makes it easier to put things back into the box that you're not going to need for that specific playthrough. And that's why I have this little sheet here that I took out from some other insert, because I've measured the box already, and it's not going to be tall enough for me to put foam core on the bottom. This, just a regular thing of cardboard, you can take it off a pizza box. I did that in Terra Mystica. If you take this regular piece of cardboard, then you just glue your foam core dividers up here and you create your foam core kind of walls, and it holds just fine. You don't need a sturdy base for a lot of things. Even this type of cardboard can work. That's all I wanted to talk about in terms of Spirit Island. Moving on, speaking of that sort of card divider, I did a similar thing for Dead of Winter. This is what I'm going to do with Spirit Island. So you'll see, again, when I'm taking this out, everything is flush with the top of the lid. This is super important to try to achieve because everything will stay in place a lot better. Again, I did that little indentation trick from Catacombs. This wasn't something that I pulled off of online. I just made this myself. And I made sure to measure the thickness of all these sort of player sheets so that I knew the height that I wanted. So there's a couple parts to this. Again, I found this at Value Village, a whole stack of them. And these were one of my best component finds. You could use this space to create a little section for dice and a couple more sections for these things. But if you have the containers, you might as well just use a container. Here I created a little tray for the heroes and the zombies, just to pass them out, and some extra zombie tokens and whatever. You just create I just glued a little partition there. And then here I made my own kind of card divider and then wrote what cards they were on the side. You don't really need a fancy label maker, just pencil will do. I put it on both sides. And this is just to be able to pull out and organize the cards in specific ways and then put back the cards that you're not going to use. So there's a lot of different cards that stay in the deck, and I was sick of just having them all in a stack, so I just wanted to have a nice little thing that you can remove and have by your side to organize. And it makes putting it away and setting it up a lot easier because you know exactly where the cards are for each location. You put the locations out and you don't even have to sort through them. They've already been sorted. So I'm gonna make something like this for Spirit Island, but again, these are super easy to make. You just get a base, and this is a cardboard base of the original Dead of Winter box. This was the original base of Dead of Winter. You can even see the Dead of Winter kind of box there. And I did this because I needed to have, again, space for the board to rest on top. I really hate box lift. When you have too much stuff and the box is kind of bursting up, I really don't like that. So when I measured first, I realized, okay, I measured the height of the card basically, and I thought, okay, I don't have the extra 5 millimeters of clearance once you add the board to the top of it. So all you do is you take a thin piece of cardboard and you put it on the bottom and you glue everything to it. Take one thing, glue, and then you cut out your individual dividers. And again, kind of like how we saw in Catacombs, once I put one in, I would just cut out a little hole so that there's enough space for me to grab all the stuff and it's not annoying. And anything can come out regardless of the size, because 5 millimeters is enough of a clearance for most fingers to be able to grab certain things. So I really like this for organizing multiple types of cards. If the box has space for them, I think it's great. If it didn't have space for it, you could still make a similar box and just make kind of cardboard dividers. But since I had the space, I figured why not make it a little bit sturdier and just pull it out in one thing and make sure that the cards don't flop all over the place. Because by having their own unique spot, they're gonna stand straight up and you can always access the section that you want without having to flip through multiple dividers. This doesn't fit that way, obviously, but so it goes this way, so that's something you'd have to consider again if you were building things for these sorts of components, is to make sure that the height is equal. And again, the rule book I didn't take into consideration here, because if I had, I might have tried to choose a thinner cardboard at the bottom of the other one. But again, the rule book's not so bad. It gets squashed down pretty well, so it's not something that you really have to worry about. You can see there's that tiny little separation between there, but if you squish it, if it's between two other boxes, it's gonna close just fine. Next up, we have Castles of Mad King Ludwig. This is another game that I really like, but I find annoying as hell to set up. So I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if it was just set up right out of the box? And So I made these two little things. This poofy thing I got in a package somewhere is in there to stop these from sliding around. And this isn't the best design because, unlike the other two, I didn't really account for the height of the box. So there's still a chance for these things to kind of slide around, but it's good enough that it works. So in this game, you're kind of building a castle, if you didn't know, and these are the various types of rooms that you can add. And so you're going to be adding different rooms depending on cards that flip up. But I was getting tired of setting them all up because they're basically just in bags. There is no insert to this at the beginning, and it was super easy. I originally was going to have this just flush on the bottom of the box. You can see that it's about the same size, which is why I wasn't worrying so much about the height of the box. But then when I closed it, I realized, oh, well, that's ridiculous. If they're sitting like this, all of the pieces are going to go everywhere when you flip your box at all. And all of that organization work you just did is going to be for nothing. So that's why I end up stacking them on top of each other. And I have this extra packing thing. I'll probably take a expansion box, to be honest, that I'm not using and put it in there to secure things from shifting around. But if you don't have it, just get any sort of packing material and it can kind of live in there. What I am really happy about is that I have a little bit of extra space for sections that I didn't use. I wasn't even sure if I was gonna put the coins there or not. But what you can do is here I've written the number of cards that you need to shuffle at the beginning of the game, just so you don't have to check the rule book for the different player counts. And here it's the same thing. These are just kind of little rules reminders that I wish was on a little sheet. And since I have the space and these things are going to mostly be shown throughout the game, I figured why not write those little reminders for myself so I don't have to check the rule book every time I play. So using all of that real estate, even the extra stuff, I put a little barricade here because I didn't want these sliding all over the place, and then I figured I would use that space for something. So that's what I did. The only thing I wish I had done when making this, if you're thinking about making your own, you can look at a lot of the broken token and the wooden inserts. There are tiered levels. Because for different player counts, you don't use all the buildings, you shuffle and you take 3 randomly or whatever. There are these kind of tiered levels where you can put all of the buildings that you're using for that game on top, and then they have these like little indentations for it to rest upon, and then underneath you can store the buildings that weren't chosen randomly for that game. Because it says return it to the box, but this way it's a lot more efficient because you can just slide it under there and have the majority of the stuff on top. And then it's easy to see when you run out of a particular thing. I wish I had done that if I was creating this again. I'd probably make it a little bit deeper and add those little notches. And I'll show you an example of those notches that you could use when we get to Istanbul. But basically what it would be is you just cut out a tiny square and then you glue that square in 4 corners of a higher insert. And then it provides something to rest on and it's gonna hold. And if it doesn't hold, then you could reinforce it with a toothpick or something down the line. But honestly, this and a glue gun holds really well for most game components. And they're the easy sorts of things to continue to experiment with and continue to reinforce. I think this was the first one that I tried to do on my own. You'll see I have extra little pieces that I wasn't sure if I was going to make something else with in there. And they now exist to kind of stop this from sliding that much. Yeah, this was the first one that I tried to make without really a template, just knowing how I wanted to pull the game out and how I kind of wanted it to be set up. And so obviously when you do those sorts of things, and I didn't do that much research, you make these kinds of mistakes. But I would much rather have this with a couple things that I could tweak, which I'm not going to bother remaking the entire insert just to tweak it, rather than have just a box filled with bags, filled with these things. It makes setup so much easier, and that's great because that was a huge detractor for getting this game out. I like this game a lot, but I would never pull it out because I just didn't want to set up the thing. So next we have Terra Mystica. Now Terra Mystica, I really didn't make much for it, but there were these tiles, which when I was playing, I thought, man, I wish I could just pass these around as one unit to the people around the table because they really don't get used. They're kind of rewards if you haven't played the game. And so you don't really need them in a prevalent spot on the table. They're more like a bank. And so I just made this little thing. I realized that the width of 3 of these was about the same width as 1 sheet of foam core. And I saw this, again, this sort of design online as well when I was looking up different inserts. And some people make entire inserts for this game and they look really good, but I felt like I didn't quite need that level because I was happy with bins that I had. So I just wanted to make this because I didn't really have anything that could hold them, and it was pretty easy. The back of this, everything's going to go everywhere, but I will show you. The back of this is a pizza box because all I really needed was some sort of base. And that's what I had in my recycling at the time. As I put these back in, obviously it's not perfect. You see some of the tokens were able to stay in and some were not. And that's because I ended up cutting with an X-Acto knife. I kind of cut it on an angle. So down lower, it's not the same as up higher. And I just haven't bothered to fix it because you don't really need to. It works fine. It's not something you're going to be throwing around. And because of how full the box is, I don't really need to worry about these going everywhere because, once again, flush lids. They're the best thing ever. And then in here you see I just have bags for character pieces because they're going to be passed to people. And then I have various different, these are the bins but in circle form. You can get them in square or in circle. I like them in square now. I was just using these up. But various different bins that I've collected somewhere. These, I think, were, my parents saved them for me. They were golf cleats, and they know I love customizing. And here I wanted to kind of create another little indent. So all you do is you just take a couple pieces and you just glue the sides and you glue the bottom. And obviously it's not ideal because, as you can see, as I spin things over, there's still, it isn't flush because I forgot that the lid had some space on it, but it still does the job. If you really wanted to fix it, you could add another thin layer, but I don't really feel the need. Then I just made another little holder for the different types of terrain that you're going to be grabbing throughout. And yes, Terra Mystica is annoying because these terrain are dual-sided, but what I did was I just made sure to organize them so that the other side was right next to it. Kind of like that. I experimented with this not having a wall because I wanted to be able to kind of get in and grab things more easily. You could just cut another sort of little finger hole there. It was perfectly fine. But I realized I had enough room to get my fingers in there, so I haven't done that. And for me, this is organized also in the most part of what you need to get out first. I mean, with the exception being my handy little sheet because it's more fragile, so I keep it up top. But you're going to pull out, I always try to keep my boards at the top of any box because you're going to pull those out first. Then you're going to say, hey, what character does everybody want to be? Someone choose them randomly. People take the characters. You then say, okay, you're brown, you're black, and then you get out your other little bins. The other stuff can stay in the box. So just an additional thing to consider when packing up and putting away. Saving yourself those extra 30 seconds sometimes can make a big difference. Feels like it can make a big difference. Then we have Istanbul. I only want to show Istanbul for one reason. I've got a few more of these bins. These are so good. They hold everything you need. I was lucky enough to see that this Ferroro Roche box and these things fit perfectly side by side. But this was one where I made another mistake because I didn't account for the amount of space that this lid provided. I spent all this time designing this cute little insert, which I thought was going to be so effective. And then when I put the top on and I turned it over, everything went everywhere. So what I did, and this is what you could do for something like Castles of Mad King Ludwig, is I just took these little squares and I glued them after the lip, and then I just glued this piece of cardboard that I got from somewhere onto there to create a top. And also for this specifically, to have walls that are double the height just because it's going to fit with the box seems kind of silly. So instead, just make a new lid for the box. And it can go on nice and neat. This has a hard time closing because I got glue all up in the grooves of where it closes. Then I can close it. And when you open it, things will mostly be in the right place. I've had a few things that have shifted because my walls really do suck in this. It's not great, but it works. And I can just open everything up and put it out on the board rather than dealing with a bunch of bags. I find as I do this more, I'm realizing that I really prefer component bins to bags. That's one that I should probably redo, to be honest. There's a lot of flaws with it, but it does the job. And if you need to fix it, it's really easy to add on an additional thing. And finally, last but certainly not least, we have Rising Sun. Now I've managed to get almost all 5 boxes into the one box. I say almost because you'll see in this daimyo box, there still are a bunch of monsters. I was looking at it beforehand, and if I really wanted to pare this down, there is a way where I could put them all into a smaller box, but because they've been painted by my lovely friend Zach, and I have the space for them, I kind of want to keep them in their separate spot. Now, this daimyo box is meant to hold both of these boxes. When I was looking online for storage solutions, I saw people who were saying, oh yeah, I managed to cram all of them in these 3 boxes. And I thought, well, yeah, that's what it's designed to do. But usually right here, I don't know if you can see, the Fox clan should be there. But since I wanted to have all of my clans into this main box, I was able to fit the Fox clan in there. And what I did, because this is a double layered, there are, as you can see, some more monsters underneath these monsters. So because of that, I thought, well, why have these empty spaces? I just took a little X-Acto knife and I cut gently around so that when I'm playing with extra monsters, if I need the Fire Dragon or the Oni of Plagues or even the tree, I don't have to really take out this whole insert, put it away. I can kind of bend it a bit and it still holds its structural integrity and just get out the thing that I want. The only thing that I would need to pull it out for is that the Kami Unbound expansion, all of their figures are underneath this spot. But if you're playing with that expansion, of course you're going to need all those figures or 4 of them. So that makes sense to have to pull it out. But if you're just adding in random monsters, you're not going to want to have to pull it out if you happen to draw the monsters that are on the bottom layer. So I like this as this. And you can see I don't even use this extra space. This is kind of for all the Kickstarter exclusives. And it's a nice box and I like it on my shelf. But the main thing I'm really proud of is that I can take this one box if I'm going somewhere and play with all of the content. If I need to, I can substitute different monster figures for the ones that are in play if I'm adding in extra monsters, but I don't want to have to take 2 boxes or 3 boxes if I'm playing with multiple clans. I want to be able to take this game somewhere and have the full experience. So again, board is on the top because that's the first thing you're going to set up. So that should be the last thing that you put into the box. Now over here, things have kind of shifted. These cardboard tokens I generally lay flat so that the box lid doesn't have as much lift, but it's also really easy to be able to store these on the side or anywhere here. The last time I played this game, I didn't, apparently. Here I have all the different clan sheets, and I have them up top here. One, because that's how you're probably going to choose if you're randomizing the clans. You just say, hey, pick a clan. And then as a second, because I want to protect the paint job again that my wonderful friend Zach did. Now you can see here, what I found is that amazingly, a full clan and the Kickstarter extras for that clan fit into one of these Ultra Pro deck boxes. This was something I found out again by looking on Board Game Geek. I didn't come up with this, but you open it and you have all the figures. And since I haven't felt the need to paint these figures, I'm not worried about the paint getting scratched. And as long as you put things gently into something like this and are secure, they're not going to get super bent and damaged and broken. You have the clan figures and you have everything else that is required to use the clan, such as the alliance tokens, the honor markers, etc. But even if you do have painted figures, like these lucky gods, they still hold up incredibly well. I haven't seen any sort of tarnish on them, and that's just because I put them in carefully when I'm putting them away. I just don't throw them in, but I play this game a lot and it moves around a lot, and like the paint job that Zach did is still just, I don't know, I think it's awesome. I can't paint anything, so I'm incredibly grateful that Zach wanted to learn how to paint, and I offered him my game to do that. Maybe when I get my copy of Ankh, maybe he and I will do a little painting series, because I know there are doubles of a lot of the Guardians in there, and he can paint one and I can paint one incredibly badly. I can learn how to paint and you can feel better about your painting, because mine will certainly be more horrible than yours. But what's great about this is that all 8 clans, the lucky gods, and the seasons cards, which you need, it's just a deck full of seasons cards, and I made these little dividers for them, fit in half of the box, which is awesome. In the other half, you have the monsters, which I kept in their regular sort of thing. And this is the thing that I am the most proud of. I'll take it out. You can see the rule book at the bottom, because I've played this game enough that I don't need it anymore. So it's at the bottom, so I don't have to worry about taking it out every time. Here you have all of the sort of bank sections. You're going to use these as the war province tokens. You're going to use them to set up at the beginning, and then the ones that you don't use, you're going to put back into their little section. Here, this isn't stapled in, it's just a spot for me to hold, again, a little bin. Those sorts of things can be removed. They just have their own little place. And then what I realized for this is that I used to have these discs in the deck boxes for the particular characters, and you see there is enough room for them to fit, but it made it a little bit more cramped. So what I did was I realized, okay, these can kind of go in a bank section. And this is what I mean in terms of using the parts of the insert that work for you. So I wanted to keep this particular plastic thing. It's really not that great quality plastic, but it does the job, because I wanted the paint that Zach painted not to get ruined by throwing these willy-nilly. But with it, there's a lot of empty vertical space that wasn't getting used. Like there's a pocket of space here, and there's a pocket of space here. And before, I was just kind of stuffing the extra material that I had. Like these turtles, for example, are the Kickstarter exclusive turtles. So I was just kind of stuffing them all underneath here without any rhyme or reason. And then whenever I would unpack, I'd have to take out all these bags. And I thought, okay, well, why can't I just measure the bottom of the box that this takes and see how much stuff I can store vertically? So we'll take this off and take this off, and the turtles will slide off as I do this. So I grabbed this one thing that can sit off to the side, and when you need a base for a monster, because it doesn't happen so frequently, you can grab one. And this is what I mean by playing the game numerous times before you design these sorts of things, because after playing this a bunch, I realized, oh yeah, these bases, they only get used when you buy a monster, so you don't actually need to have them on you. And if you don't buy any monsters, you're not going to use them, so why give them to players to set up? You can see I also drew the outline of the turtles here in a way that I think they fit most efficiently when putting things back together. But I'm particularly proud of how I was able to use the vertical space. So if you have a part of the insert that you know you want to keep, like I knew I wanted to keep this, then figure out what elements you need and how you can make that work for you. This was so easy to create a little base, and then I wanted a section to hold this, so I just made a little square. And I wanted a section to hold these 3 things to put out the war province tokens, and so I just made another little square with a couple dividers in them. I knew that I could stack circles in this area, and I thought, oh, okay, why not just stick a little pole standing up? And so I just cut a rectangle of foam core and put it in there. And when I felt like that wasn't that secure, I then added on a little cross piece so that it didn't move around that much. And then when I put this over and I looked through it, I realized I still had a little bit of space here, which was great because you have these sort of player aids and war things, and I was able to just kind of rest them in the middle. Only 5 fit here perfectly, but still, that's enough for me, and the other 2 can just be stored kind of somewhere along the side of the box. So that's my Rising Sun solution, which I'm incredibly proud of. These Ultra Pro decks are awesome. They were like $2 each, I think. So I did spend a little bit of money on this to make this thing because I have 10 boxes here, so I spent 20 bucks. Instead of 160, oh, forgot to put that back. But I'm really proud of it because it's one unit that you can take out and keep on the side, and everything fits kind of nice and smooth. And then you have enough space to stick these in on the side if you really want. Throw those up there, sure. This I use, not because it needs it, but I cover the minis just because. And then lastly, when you're packing it away, the board will be the last thing that you fold up anyway, just like it's the first thing that you fold out, and it goes right on top. I definitely recommend putting the rule book at the bottom of games that you know really well, because you know the rules. You don't have to check them anymore. So why are they at the top of your box just to be put to the side? You know how to play, so set it up so that you can play. That's pretty much it. Remember, use the parts of the insert that work for you, and then make the rest. If nothing works, sure, make it from scratch. But if you have something that you like, keep it, because you will be able to find ways of dollar store bins and organizers, or your own creative use of Foamcore. You can see it's $1.50 when I was chopping it up. Through your own creative use of Foamcore to make the things that you need. So those are my inserts. I'm pretty proud of most of them because I cannot stress enough how horrible I am at crafts. So when building your own insert, remember the following. 1, start with the base. If it's a full box insert like Catacombs, make sure you lay one single sheet that covers the base of the area that you want to work with. Then you can worry about measuring the different areas and creating the different parts for your various components. But you know that if you have this as your base, then once it's all been chopped up into various pieces, it'll still be able to fit into the box and you won't have made things that are too big. So start with the base. On whatever surface you're working with, if it's half the box, the whole box, just a tiny area, start with the base and make sure it fits in the box. Number 2 is making sure that the final height is flush with the top of the box. That way, you can store it both horizontally and vertically, depending on your shelf arrangement. And things will stay where they're supposed to instead of immediately falling out of all the sections that you just worked so hard to complete. Number 3, don't forget when either measuring the height or the width of separate components to include the 5 millimeters that is the width of the foam core. This takes up space, especially if you're going to use it to create multiple dividers. Make sure to be incorporating that into your measurements and not just drawing a line and then measuring the width of whatever you're going to try to put in there. When I was making my little card holder for Dead of Winter, I completely miscalculated because I just measured the components that I needed and drew lines in between then and had to reevaluate as I went along. Luckily, I still had a lot of space because there weren't that many cards, but it took up a lot more room than I expected. So don't forget to account for the walls, and both walls. If you're making 2 different component bins that are going to be able to be taken out separately, they're both going to have a wall. So don't forget to incorporate those measurements. Number 4 is don't use super glue, just use a glue gun. You can get them at the dollar store. This is all you need. You don't need anything fancier than a glue gun. And number 5, a small X-Acto knife. The smaller the better, and make sure it's sharp because it's easy for a dull blade to not cut through everything and give you that kind of precise edge that you want. It doesn't really matter. This is friggin' blunt as heck and I'm still using it because it still works. But if it's sharper and it can cut through, you'll get less little kind of flaking edges. Which doesn't matter if you're using a glue gun because the glue will fill up those pockets and make it stand up nice and straight. But even still, having a nice small X-Acto knife allows you to kind of trim off the tops too of your component bins when they're inevitably too high and the box lid is lifting. And finally, number 6, which is a great thing when doing all crafts, is measure twice and cut once. But honestly, this stuff is so cheap that if you make a mistake, it's easy to get more. That's pretty much it. Go forth, create wonderful inserts, have fun. And write in the comments below if I missed anything that is brilliant that would help people create their own inserts. What sort of component bins do you like? Are there any useful, cheap tools that someone can get? Not a 3D printer or laser cutter. I'm too poor for that. Anyway, if you liked the video, please make sure to hit that like button and the subscribe. Just do it. Don't be stingy. Do it. And share this video with anyone who you think it might help get started creating their own stuff. And also tell me what's the best insert you've made. What are you the most proud of making? I want to hear. And if you have any other tips and tricks that I missed, make sure to include them as well. Thank you again for watching. My name is Chris George, and I don't have a catchphrase, so... Bye.